When Lieutenant Marcus Chen opened his eyes in the darkness of the research outpost, the first thing he noticed was the silence. And the second thing he noticed was that every single one of Ambassador Kira's security detail was unconscious on the floor. And the third thing, the thing that made his blood freeze in his veins, was the low rumbling growl coming from the shadows near her sleeping quarters. He had been assigned to the diplomatic mission on TR-7 for exactly 8 days. And in those 8 days he had learned 3 critical facts. 1. The indigenous predator species called thornbacks were considered the most dangerous creatures in this sector, with claws that could shred reinforced steel. 2. Ambassador Kira of the Alari people was the most frustratingly fearless person he had ever met. And 3. He was absolutely not supposed to be developing feelings for the person he was meant to protect. Marcus tried to move, but his limbs felt like lead. Whatever had knocked out the others was still affecting him, and he could only watch in horror as his vision adjusted to see not 1, but 4 juvenile thornbacks, each the size of a full-grown wolf, positioned in a perfect perimeter around the doorway where Kira slept. His training screamed at him to reach for his weapon, to trigger the alert to do something, but his body refused to cooperate, and all he could do was lie there on the cold floor and wonder why he was not already dead. The thornbacks were not attacking. They were sitting, watching, waiting, like sentries. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. They were guarding her. 3 hours earlier, before the world had gone dark, Marcus had been reviewing the security protocols for their expedition into the Whisperwood, the vast bioluminescent forest that covered most of TR-7's southern continent. When Kira had walked into the command center with that particular expression she got when she was about to do something that would give her security team collective heart attacks. "I want to visit the Thornback breeding grounds tomorrow," she had announced, her voice carrying that melodic accent of her people, those unusual violet eyes, sparkling with determination. And Marcus had felt his stomach drop because he absolutely knew, that nothing he said would change her mind. She was Alari. And the Alari were known throughout the galaxy for 2 things: their extraordinary beauty that made them look almost exactly like humans, except for their elegantly pointed ears, and their absolutely baffling ability to connect with other living beings on some level that human science could not quite explain. Kira embodied both traits to a degree that Marcus found deeply unfair to his professional composure. She wore her silver hair in a long braid that fell past her shoulders. And today she had been dressed in fitted tactical pants and a sleek black top that somehow managed to be both practical and striking, with a pearl-white jacket bearing the diplomatic insignia of the Alari Confederation. She was young for an ambassador, probably only 24 or 25 in human years, but she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made seasoned officers take her seriously. "Ambassador, the Thornbacks are apex predators," Marcus had said, keeping his voice level and professional despite his growing concern. "They have killed 3 researchers in the past 2 years. The breeding grounds are explicitly marked as off-limits in our mission parameters." Kira had turned to look at him directly, and he had felt that uncomfortable flutter in his chest that he had been trying to ignore for the past week. "Lieutenant Chen, I am aware of the dangers, but understanding the Thornbacks is essential to the treaty negotiations. The native Threnari people consider them sacred. If we cannot coexist with the wildlife, we cannot establish a meaningful diplomatic relationship." She had paused, and then added more softly, "I would never ask anyone to take a risk I would not take myself. If you believe it is too dangerous, I will go alone," which was, of course, emotional blackmail of the highest order, because there was absolutely no possibility that Marcus would let her go into predator-infested wilderness alone. And she knew it, and he knew she knew it. "I will assemble a security team," he had said, and the smile she had given him in response had been radiant enough to light up the dim command center. "Thank you, Marcus. I know this is not easy for you." She had used his first name, which she rarely did, and the sound of it in her voice had done strange things to his ability to think clearly. They had set out at dawn with a team of 6 guards, moving through the Whisperwood with weapons ready and sensors scanning for threats. And Kira had walked among them like she was on a casual nature hike, pointing out the glowing fungi and the crystalline flowers with genuine delight. "Look at this ecosystem," she had said to Marcus as they walked side by side. "Everything here is connected. The trees feed the fungi support the insects sustain the predators. It is a perfect balance." Marcus had been watching the tree line for movement rather than admiring the scenery. It is a dangerous balance. Those perfect predators you are so fascinated by would be happy to add us to their food chain, Kira had laughed, a sound like wind chimes that made something warm bloom in his chest, despite his anxiety. You are very focused on threats, Lieutenant. Has anyone ever told you that you need to relax? He had given her a dry look. My job is keeping you alive, Ambassador. Relaxing is not in my contract. She had touched his arm then, just briefly, her fingers light against his sleeve. My name is Kira. When it is just us talking, you can use it. The moment had stretched between them, her violet eyes meeting his brown ones. And Marcus had been acutely aware that this feeling, this growing attachment, was absolutely the worst possible complication he could develop on this mission. They had found the Thornback Den in a clearing where the massive trees created a natural cathedral, their bioluminescent leaves casting everything in shades of blue and green. And Marcus had immediately signaled the team to halt because there, in the center of the clearing, were 4 adult thornbacks the size of grizzly bears, their scales gleaming like dark metal, their eyes glowing amber in the shadows. And clustered near them were 6 cubs, smaller, but no less dangerous looking, with their developing horns and needle-sharp teeth. We should go back, Marcus had whispered urgently to Kira. This is too exposed. If they decide we are threats, we cannot fight 6 adults. But Kira had not been listening. She had been staring at the cubs with an expression of absolute wonder, and before Marcus could stop her, she had stepped forward into the clearing. His heart had nearly stopped. Kira, no. But she had raised a hand to quiet him, and then she had done something that Marcus would never forget. She had begun to hum. It was not a melody he recognized, something low and rhythmic that seemed to resonate in his bones, and the adult thornbacks had turned toward her with their massive heads tilted, not attacking, just listening. The cubs had perked up, their small ears swiveling toward the sound, and one of them, braver or more curious than the others, had taken a tentative step toward Kira. Marcus had stood frozen with his hand on his weapon, watching in disbelief as the cub had approached Kira and she had knelt down, still humming, and extended her hand slowly. The cub had sniffed her fingers, and then, impossibly, it had pressed its scaled head against her palm like a cat seeking affection. Kira's face had lit up with joy, and she had looked back at Marcus with such pure happiness that he had felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. They are just babies, she had said softly. They are curious and playful. Look, and indeed, 2 more cubs had bounded over, investigating the strange silver-haired visitor with enthusiastic snuffling and gentle headbutts. And the adult thornbacks had watched but made no move to attack, seemingly content that Kira meant no harm. Marcus had slowly released his grip on his weapon, though every instinct screamed that this situation was insane. You have a death wish, Ambassador, he had muttered, but there had been no heat in it, only amazement. Kira had grinned at him, actually grinned, with a thornback cub trying to chew on her braid. I have curiosity, Lieutenant. There is a difference. Come here. They will not hurt you if you are calm. Against his better judgment, Marcus had stepped forward, and Kira had guided his hand to touch the cub's scales, which had been surprisingly warm and smooth. You see, she had whispered, not everything fierce is evil. Sometimes strength simply needs to be understood. Her hand had still been guiding his, her touch gentle, and Marcus had realized that they were very close. Close enough that he could see the faint luminescent quality of her skin, the way her eyes reflected the forest light. And for a moment, the dangerous predators and the mission parameters and everything else had faded away. They had spent nearly an hour in that clearing, Kira documenting the thornback behavior while the cubs played around them. And Marcus had found himself relaxing despite the absurdity of the situation, watching Kira laugh as a cub tried to climb into her lap. My people believe that all consciousness is connected, she had told him as they sat together on a fallen log while the cubs tumbled over each other nearby. We feel emotions from other beings, their fear, their joy, their pain. It is why we became diplomats rather than warriors. We cannot bear to cause suffering when we can feel it so deeply ourselves. Marcus had looked at her profile, the way the bioluminescent light played across her features. That sounds like a difficult way to live. You must feel everyone's pain. She had nodded slowly. Yes, but I also feel their happiness, their love, their hope. The connection goes both ways. Right now, for instance, I can feel your concern for me, your duty. but also something else, something warmer that you try very hard to hide. Marcus had felt his face heat. Ambassador, she had turned to him with a soft smile. Kira, please. And you do not have to explain. I feel what I feel. I only wanted you to know that I feel it too. The moment had hung between them, charged with possibility. And Marcus had been trying to formulate a response that would not end his career when one of the guards had called out that they needed to head back before dark. The return journey to the outpost had been uneventful. Everyone tired, but satisfied with the successful expedition. And they had arrived at the research station just as the twin moons were rising. Dinner had been standard ration packs heated in the small galley, and Kira had talked excitedly with the research team about the Thornback observations. Her whole face animated with enthusiasm, and Marcus had found himself smiling despite his exhaustion. After the meal, he had done a final perimeter check, confirmed that all security systems were active, and verified that the guard rotation was set for the night. Everything had been secure. The outpost was a reinforced structure designed to withstand the harsh T-REN-R7 environment, with multiple redundant life support systems and sensors that would alert them to any breach. Marcus had felt confident when he had gone to his quarters, certain that Kira was safe with 4 guards on active duty. He had fallen asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the day's tension. And then he had woken up on the floor with his entire team unconscious and Thornback cubs growling in the darkness. Now, lying paralyzed with whatever toxin or gas had flooded the outpost, Marcus tried to piece together what had happened. The life support systems must have been compromised. Something had been introduced into the air that had knocked everyone out. But how? And why were the Thornback cubs here? The pieces clicked together as his vision fully cleared, and he saw that one wall of the outpost had been breached. A hole torn through the reinforced panels, and through that hole, he could see movement in the forest beyond. Adult Thornbacks. Multiple adults. They were trying to get in. His blood ran cold as he realized what was happening. This was not a random attack. The Thornbacks were hunting, and they had chosen the outpost as their target, probably drawn by the scent of the humans and the promise of easy prey. The breach in the wall meant the adults could enter at any moment, and with all the guards unconscious, there was nothing to stop them from reaching Kira. Except there was. The cubs, the 4 juvenile Thornbacks that Kira had befriended in the forest, had somehow followed them back, or perhaps had been drawn by some instinct, and now they stood between the breach in the wall and Kira's quarters. Their small bodies tense, their growls steady and warning. Marcus watched in astonishment as one of the adult Thornbacks pushed its massive head through the breach, amber eyes glowing with predatory hunger. And the cubs responded immediately, their growls intensifying, their small claws scraping against the floor. The adult paused, and Marcus could see the calculation happening, the assessment of whether these cubs were a real threat or just an annoyance. One of the cubs, the brave one that had first approached Kira in the forest, stepped forward and released a sound Marcus had never heard before. A high-pitched keening that was part distress call and part challenge. The adult Thornback's ears flattened against its skull, and it pulled back slightly from the breach. The cubs were defending her. These predator babies were standing guard over the alien girl who had shown them kindness, refusing to let their own kind pass. And it was simultaneously the most incredible and terrifying thing Marcus had ever witnessed. He tried again to move and managed to twitch his fingers. The paralysis was wearing off, but not fast enough, and he needed to get to his weapon. Needed to help defend Kira because he could not trust that the cubs would be enough to hold back fully grown Thornbacks indefinitely. Another adult appeared at the breach, and then another, and the cubs shifted their formation, spreading out to cover more space, but never leaving the doorway to Kira's quarters undefended. Marcus could see they were terrified, their small bodies trembling with fear, but they did not run. They held their ground. Brave little idiots, he muttered, his voice coming out slurred but functional. And the sound made one of the cubs glance back at him, its amber eyes meeting his for just a second before returning to watch the breach. That momentary glance felt like recognition, like the cub remembered him from the forest, remembered that he had been with the silver-haired one who had been kind. Marcus felt a surge of determination. If these baby predators could stand Vigil despite their fear, then he damn well could get up and do his job. With agonizing slowness, Marcus forced his arm to move, dragging himself inch by inch across the floor toward where his rifle had fallen. his muscles screaming in protest as sensation returned in painful tingles. He could hear stirring behind him, other guards beginning to wake, groaning in confusion, but they were still too disoriented to be useful. The adult Thornbacks at the breach were getting bolder. One of them had managed to get its shoulders through the gap, and the cubs were backing up step by step, still growling, but clearly outmatched. Marcus's fingers closed around his rifle just as the adult Thornback fully entered the outpost, its massive form filling the corridor, its eyes locked on the doorway where Kira slept, unaware. Not today, Marcus gritted out, and he raised the rifle despite his shaking arms, and fired a warning shot that cracked like thunder in the enclosed space. The energy bolt slamming into the wall beside the adult Thornback's head, the creature roared, a sound that shook the entire structure, and turned its attention to Marcus. Which was both good because it was no longer focused on Kira's door, and very bad because Marcus was currently lying on the floor with minimal muscle control and a rifle that needed another 3 seconds to recharge. The Thornback took a step toward him, claws scraping against metal, and Marcus prepared himself for a very short and painful end to his military career. Then all 4 cubs rushed forward as one, throwing their small bodies at the adult with reckless courage, biting and clawing at its legs, and the adult Thornback bellowed in surprise and pain. Stumbling backward toward the breach, Marcus used those precious seconds to drag himself to a sitting position and fire again, this time aiming for the gap in the wall itself, triggering a partial collapse of the damaged panels that forced the adult Thornbacks outside to retreat or be crushed. Marcus? The voice was Kira's, sleep rough and confused, and he turned to see her standing in the doorway of her quarters, taking in the scene with wide violet eyes, the unconscious guards beginning to stir, the cubs pacing and growling, the breach in the wall, and Marcus sitting on the floor with his rifle still raised. What happened? She looked at the cubs, and her expression shifted to immediate concern. Oh no, you followed us. You should not be here, little ones. It is not safe. Marcus would have laughed if his ribs did not hurt so much. Not safe? Kira, they just saved your life. We all got knocked out by some kind of gas leak, and adult Thornbacks tried to breach the outpost. Those cubs stood guard over you the entire time. They fought off their own kind to protect you. He saw the moment the realization hit her, the way her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. She dropped to her knees, and the cubs immediately rushed to her, pressing against her, seeking comfort after their terrifying ordeal. And she wrapped her arms around them, murmuring in her own language. And Marcus could see her shoulders shaking. The next hour was chaos, as the rest of the guards fully woke. As the breach was temporarily sealed, as the life support systems were purged and tested, and as they discovered that a fault in the environmental processors had allowed a buildup of sedative compound from the research lab to vent into the living quarters. A 1 in a million malfunction that could have gotten everyone killed. Marcus coordinated the emergency protocols while medics checked everyone for adverse effects, but his attention kept drifting to Kira, who sat in the corner of the command center with the 4 cubs clustered around her, refusing to leave her side. She had insisted they be allowed to stay, at least until morning, when it would be safe to escort them back to the forest, and no one had the heart to argue with her, not after what the cubs had done. When things had finally settled and the immediate crisis was contained, Marcus found himself standing beside Kira, looking down at the pile of sleeping cubs who had exhausted themselves with their vigil. I have been a soldier for 8 years, Marcus said quietly. I have seen humans do incredibly brave things, but I have never seen anything like what those cubs did tonight. They were terrified. I could see it, but they did not leave you. Kira looked up at him, and there were still tear tracks on her luminescent cheeks. They felt my kindness in the forest. The connection I made with them, it meant something. When I was in danger, they came. I did not call them. I did not even know I needed help, but somehow they knew. That is the bond my people speak of, the invisible thread that connects all living things. She reached out and took Marcus's hand, her fingers warm and steady. You were paralyzed, but you still fought for me. You put yourself between me and the threat, even though you could barely move. Why? Marcus looked at their joined hands, at her upturned face, and decided that honesty was the only option. Because in 8 days you have made me feel more alive than I have felt in years. Because your courage terrifies me and inspires me in equal measure. Because when I thought you might die, I realized that keeping you safe is not just my job anymore. It is the most important thing in my world. Kira's breath caught, and she stood, still holding his hand, close enough now that he could see every detail of her face. The otherworldly beauty that somehow made her more rather than less real. My people mate for life, she said softly. When we feel a connection, we know it immediately. I have known since the third day I met you, when you gave your dinner ration to the young researcher who was still hungry, and you thought no one saw. I have known since you learned 3 words of my language just to greet me properly in the morning. I have known since you trusted me enough to touch the cubs, even though you were afraid. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Kira, I am human. I do not have your abilities. I cannot feel emotions like you do. I am just a soldier who is absolutely not good enough for an ambassador. She smiled then, soft and certain. You are Marcus Chen, who stands up even when he cannot walk, who protects even when he is powerless, who sees baby predators as brave instead of threatening. You are exactly who I need. The question is whether you want a partner who brings home orphan Thornbacks and causes diplomatic incidents regularly. He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound felt like release after the terror of the night. I want you. Complications and Thornback cubs and all. I want to watch you befriend every dangerous creature in the galaxy. I want to argue with you about security protocols and lose every time because you smile at me. I want to see where this impossible connection leads. Kira's smile widened into something radiant. Then we are agreed, Lieutenant. You are stuck with me now. She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and brief and perfect, and Marcus felt the rightness of it settle into his bones like coming home. When they pulled apart, all 4 cubs were awake and watching them with tilted heads and curious expressions, and Kira laughed, the sound full of joy. I think they approve, she said, and Marcus shook his head in amused disbelief. Your children are very judgmental, he teased. And she swatted his arm playfully. The next morning, they escorted the cubs back to the Whisperwood together. Just Marcus and Kira with light weapons and a promise to the nervous security team that they would stay in constant communication. The cubs bounded ahead through the glowing forest, occasionally circling back to check that their silver-haired friend was still following. And when they reached the clearing where the den was located, the adult Thornbacks were waiting. Marcus tensed, but Kira squeezed his hand reassuringly, and they watched as the cubs rushed to their parents, making excited, chirping sounds that seemed to be telling the story of their adventure. One of the adult females approached, the largest of the group, and Marcus recognized her as the one that had tried to enter the outpost. She stopped a few feet from Kira and lowered her massive head, and Kira stepped forward fearlessly and placed her hand on the creature's scaled snout. I know you were trying to protect your babies, Kira said softly, though Marcus knew the Thornback could not understand the words. I know you were afraid when they did not come home. Thank you for trusting me with them. The adult Thornback made a low rumbling sound, not threatening, but almost peaceful, and then she turned and led the cubs back toward the den. But not before the brave cub, the first one who had approached Kira, ran back for one final headbutt against her leg. Like a goodbye. They walked back to the outpost. Marcus said, the treaty negotiations just got a lot easier. When you tell the Threnari people that the sacred Thornbacks defended you, that they chose to protect you, it will mean everything to them. Kira nodded thoughtfully. Yes, but that is not why I am happy. I am happy because those cubs taught us something important, that connection transcends species, that kindness creates bonds stronger than fear, that even the fiercest creatures understand love and loyalty. That is the foundation of real peace, Marcus. Not treaties and agreements, but genuine connection. Marcus pulled her closer as they walked. You are going to change the galaxy, you know that? One befriended predator at a time. She leaned her head against his shoulder. We are going to change it, together, you and I, and whatever other impossible situations we find ourselves in. When they returned to the outpost, the research team had finally identified and repaired the environmental processor fault, and preparations were underway to continue the diplomatic mission. But now, with upgraded safety protocols and a story that would be told across the sector, how an Alari ambassador survived an attack not because of weapons or walls, but because of the predator cubs who remembered her kindness and stood vigil when all her guards were asleep. Marcus filed his official report, noting in precise military language the events of the night, and attached Kira's detailed observations about Thornback behavior and social bonds. And he knew that this mission report would be studied in both military academies and xenobiology programs for years to come. But the unofficial story, the one he would carry in his heart, was simpler. Sometimes the most dangerous things in the universe can become your greatest protectors. Sometimes courage is standing guard even when you are small and afraid. And sometimes love arrives in the form of a silver-haired alien girl who sees beauty in predators and possibility in a soldier who thought he was just doing his job. That night, as Marcus took his watch shift on the outpost's observation deck, Kira joined him, bringing 2 cups of the awful synthetic coffee that was the only thing keeping the team functional. They sat together in comfortable silence, looking out at the bioluminescent forest, where somewhere in the darkness, 4 thornback cubs were probably sleeping peacefully after their grand adventure. "Do you think they will remember us?" Kira asked, her voice soft in the quiet. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think they will remember you. You are kind of unforgettable." She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder again, a gesture that was already becoming familiar and precious. "We make a good team, Marcus Chen. You keep me safe, and I make sure you experience the wonder of the universe instead of just its threats." He kissed the top of her silver hair. "Best team in the sector," he agreed. And as the twin moons rose over T-Ren R7, casting their light across a galaxy full of infinite possibilities, Marcus realized that he had found something he had not even known he was searching for: a purpose beyond duty, a connection beyond species, and a future with a woman who could make even the fiercest predators into allies. The cubs had stood vigil when the guards had fallen, and in doing so, they had protected not just an ambassador's life, but the beginning of something extraordinary.